We're talking NFC. No, we're talking AFC North today. The NFC is in the books. Go back if you want to find the old podcast on draft grades of the NFC. We are on to the AFC North today. Our draft grades for the AFC North, it was the Baltimore Ravens, the Cincinnati Bengals, the Cleveland Browns, and the Pittsburgh Steelers. 3 good draft classes, and the Steelers is what we'll be talking about on today's program coming up right now.
You're listening to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show, your daily podcast on the National Football League, powered by the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock and Matt Williamson with you once again at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL, talking AFC North draft grades. A programming note. I'm super excited to hear Matt talk about the Steelers. That's why I'm so up today, and an extra cup of caffeine for this wonderful Thursday morning. I thought it was Thursday all yesterday too. Like my life's
all screwed up.
It's like I'm moving, and you get the draft, and sometimes I'm recording a podcast for the next day, so like my brain's always one day ahead. But we are here on.
I blame the moving. Moving just screws you up.
Oh, moving is. And like, if you're an adult and you can afford it, hire movers, for the love of God.
Oh, yeah.
Hire movers.
Even if you do, I bet it's a pain. Like, where's this stuff going to go, and what am I throwing away, and all?
Yeah.
And
we're going back to the Bay, so we're going reverse, and we upsized in going from a 1-bedroom San Francisco apartment to a big house in Davis. Now we're downsizing again, going back to just north of the Golden Gate Bridge in the Bay Area, and downsizing by pretty much half as much square footage. And it's amazing how much, and I would like to blame, my wife for a lot of it. It's just how much.
And a young kid has something to do with it, too.
Oh, and a child.
Oh,
it's like,
man, the toys.
Oh, my Lord. It's the amount of stuff we have acquired. And I feel like I haven't bought anything new for myself in 3 years, yet somehow we have an amazing amount of stuff in this house that we're downsizing. So we're going to have a little storage unit for a bit till we figure all that out. But yeah, moving is not a lot of fun. Hire movers. That is my life advice for the listeners.
Heck yeah.
Programming note, Friday's show, we'll talk schedule release and some of the most notable things on the 2022 NFL schedule. The NFL's never short of storylines to cover here, which is why we do a podcast daily every single day of the year, all throughout the entire offseason as well. So make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. The Locked On NFL YouTube channel is the home of the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show to get everything all year long from Matt Williamson and myself. And Matt, you've got some very good knowledge of one of these teams, the Steelers. It'll be the last team we hit here. We'll start alphabetical by city with the Baltimore Ravens first up with our draft grades, and really universally a draft that most people liked, including myself. And it started out with the Philadelphia Eagles jumping up in front of them. And I wonder if it would have been Jordan Davis at 14. But maybe in the end, maybe it ends up being better for the Baltimore Ravens if Kyle Hamilton turns out to be that guy that a lot of people thought was the best prospect in this draft before the pre-draft process and before he had some pedestrian 40 times and some pedestrian workouts. But Kyle Hamilton falls to the Baltimore Ravens in the first round at 14. And then they do some maneuvering to get back up and draft Iowa center Tyler Linderbaum at pick 25 at the end of round 1. They come back, and just so many picks, 11 draft picks for the Baltimore Ravens in this one. But I feel like we should pause and talk about those 2 first rounders because, not high end position value there with safety and center. But if you told me that Kyle Hamilton and Tyler Linderbaum combined will play for, 20 seasons in Baltimore and have, a handful of Pro Bowls. I mean, that, it just seems like something very Baltimore Ravensy about getting some really nice value and just getting long-term foundational pieces on both their offense and defense.
Yeah. And first of all, everyone knows I'm a Steeler homer. I'm not going to hide that. We're talking about the Steelers division here. So when I say something negative about the other 3 teams, it's not personal. I'm doing my best here to tell you that. And universally, any website you go to, oh my, the Ravens draft was unbelievable. I mean, they just are so much better at it than everybody else. Trust me, I praise the Ravens like crazy. And I adore their ability to accumulate picks. And they had 10 picks in the top 4 rounds, including 6 fourth rounders. You better land some good players. However, I do think, and I'm stealing some of this from our buddy Mike Sando. He has a great article on The Athletic right now where he talks to GMs and a wrap up of every team, probably 500 to 800 words per team times 32 teams. And I'm actually listening to him on the Athletic podcast as we speak. I'm like 5 minutes into it, and they're talking about the Ravens. And it's an interesting, basically what Mike says is the rest of the GMs chuckle a little bit because the Ravens get a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. Like, for example, if Jacksonville would have taken Ajabo at 45, that's a risk. I don't know. But the Ravens do it. Wow, they're smarter than everybody else. And I'm not bashing the Ravens draft. It's probably my favorite draft of all 32 in terms of what they added. But there are some questions, like there's a reason Linderbaum fell. There's a reason Hamilton fell. Some of the quotes from that article are how many 6'4" safeties are out there succeeding? How many, Linderbaum has very short arms. He's really a zone only center, and they're a very power heavy team. He's nothing like Falele, the other offensive lineman they took. Nothing like them. All that being said, they're a tape-driven organization more than most. And if it was the day that the day after the national championship game, no pro days, combines, senior bowls, you could tell me that Hamilton and Linderbaum were top 5 picks, and I would believe it. And they got what I think are long-term starters. But don't think for a minute that there's a chance that they miss. You know what I mean? That they can't miss.
Oh yeah, and they have missed, and they will miss, and I do the same thing. I'm guilty of, you see that happen, and you're like, oh, of course, and it just looks even better when it's the Ravens making the selections, and you're right. A different team would have made those picks, and
they deserve the benefit of the doubt. Going back to Ozzie,
if Trent Baalke didn't draft Trevon Walker number 1, then David Ajabo would have been a Jacksonville Jaguars.
Of course, right.
The team ACL that he loves to put together, but they couldn't go there, so the Jaguars ended up picking a couple different players than David Ajabo. But again, you got to credit the Ravens because Ajabo fell to a level where it's like, man, even if it doesn't quite work out, it's worth the risk all the way down at 45. If it would have been a first round pick, it'd be like, gosh, that's coming off the Achilles. You don't know what you're going to get. But man, at 45, he could be as good or better than the guy they drafted in the first round last year to come off the edge in Owe. So
right.
I
don't know if you know this, but Ajabo and Owe went to high school together and are good friends. And the new defensive coordinator for the Ravens was Michigan's defensive coordinator, the Harbaugh connection. So they know all about it. It's a perfect landing spot for him. But that doesn't mean that it's a home run and it's not without risk.
Yes. And then when I talked about the Jordan Davis pick that they didn't end up making at 14, then Travis Jones falls into their lap, defensive tackle, nose tackle in round 3, which was phenomenal value to me. I don't know how he got out of the first 2 rounds. So when you start to add
the
that
next
up,
best thing.
Yeah, and it's just, and it wasn't a deep class of tackles either. So for Travis Jones, and I know there's some raw talent there, but man, he looks so good at the Senior Bowl.
Yep.
And just a phenomenal draft. I mean, I'm going to give him an A, even though I don't even know how many of these half a dozen, and they were able to dominate the 4th round. I don't know how many of these half a dozen 4th rounders are going to be any good. But it started with Daniel Faalele, who's the biggest man in this draft. And you're right, so different than Tyler Linderbaum. Really quick, though, on Tyler Linderbaum, I will say, even though he's undersized and kind of short-armed and not the biggest center, he can – I don't have a problem with him playing in a power scheme because he's got that wrestling background.
Yeah, leverage.
And he doesn't get driven backwards. Like I think he's probably underrated the power in his game just because he's smaller. And I saw a clip. I think it was on draft day. I saw this clip and I didn't realize it. I knew he was a wrestler, but I saw a clip of him and his former Iowa teammate, Tristan Wirfs. Apparently they had some heavyweight battles for a while. They were like a friendly rivalry in wrestling. And I saw a clip of him slamming Tristan Wirfs, who's a much bigger guy by about 30 pounds, and pinning him. And I guess, Wirfs has gotten him a couple times too in some of those matchups, but to win
it's good company,
might have been to win like a big championship, Linderbaum slams Tristan Wirfs. So there's some power to his game, even though he's athletic and would have fit zone schemes. I think he fits any scheme, which is why he ended up being a Raven here. But yeah,
so you know what? I think he's an A+ run blocker, A+ on the run heaviest team in the league. So,
and you can give them a
good.
little help if you feel like you need to, if there's a big nose that they're trying to root out of there. And that's what that's the beauty of having a center. Even that's where you can have an undersized player is he can handle one-on-ones. He can get out and move, but you can double team and you can have your guard help him out if you're trying to get somebody. And there's just fewer of those big nose tackles in the league anyway. And you drafted one of the two in this class, or one of the handful, in Travis Jones in round 3. So Falele, which is a nice little lottery ticket. Maybe he's too big, but maybe he's even a future starting right tackle for them in the 4th round. Then you go Jalen Armour-Davis out of Alabama corner, Charlie Kohler, a Iowa State tight end. And with these 6, it's really clear towards the end of the 4th round, they had 6 4th-round picks, and they kind of ran out of guys. They're like, what do we even do here? It's like, well, let's just draft another tight end, and why not? Let's draft a punter too. So Jordan Stout, Penn State punter at the end of round 4 with Isaiah Likely, the second tight end they selected in round 4. They finished round 4 with Demarion Williams, Houston cornerback, and then a pick I really love too. They finished strong. Tyler Beatty, the running back from Missouri. He's not big, but a really good receiver out of the backfield, but doesn't necessarily fit the mold of a classic Baltimore Ravens running back. But maybe that's what they needed, is someone who's very different than some of the guys they already have and can give you some 3rd down value, maybe some special teams value. All the way down in the 6th round, love the value of Tyler Beatty. Out of Missouri, the running back. So it's an A draft. It's one of the best drafts, maybe an A+ draft. It's one of the best drafts in the league this year, in my opinion.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I can't argue that. I mean, it's 100% true. Reading Mike's article, Falele and Jones, I was shocked Jones lasted to 76, Travis Jones, and there was major concerns around the league about their weight. That they can balloon up. That will they stay in proper shape? That was a concern with those guys. The Jalen Armour-Davis pick is probably my favorite pick of all of them. I mean, it's a real easy one to overlook, but I looked at him during the draft process, like that's a starting NFL corner. And we saw what happened to the Ravens when Peters and Humphrey and those guys got hurt. They're very corner dependent. They have massive Alabama ties as well. I bet that's a hit. My biggest criticism, and I guess they tried to do it on several occasions, they traded Hollywood Brown and didn't draft a receiver. Is Odell going to end up there, or Fuller, or Landry, or somebody like that? And I love Bateman, but they cut Boykin and they got rid of Marquise Brown. You would think with 10 picks in the first 4 rounds, you could find a wideout, but maybe that's still to come. I didn't love tight end, punter, tight end, but with picks between 128 and 139, I thought you could get better value there. They're obviously going to have a lot of 2 and 3 tight end sets. And like you said, you start to run out of position spots. It's hard for everybody to make the team and when you have these many picks. So I guess there's a good reason or a good argument for, Brian Cook, or I forget his first name, Cook, the punter, the long-term punter with the Ravens, who's been great. He's been one of the best punters of this generation. But I'm not looking at the salary cap, but I'm sure he's making $4 or $5 million. Would you rather have the 130th pick overall or $5 million in cap space or whatever that number is while you get 12 years younger at punter? Okay. Just the economics and the math add up there.
And do you gain $5 million of salary cap there that lets you go, sign a free agent wide receiver to fill
right,
or something like that? But yeah, stock way up on Rashad Bateman, right? In the dynasty world.
Huge, massive. Yeah, blowing up.
Falele is so interesting. Last note here, we got to move on to the other teams in the division, but 6'8", 384. I mean, that's on paper, that's too big. There's not many successful players that are that big. And you could, when you're 384, that could turn into 400 pretty dang quick. I imagine, one, a couple of, drives home from the practice facility to the wrong, the wrong
all you can eat. Yeah, right.
And so, but what's crazy is I watched him. It's like, and his workout numbers aren't great, but then when you watch him, it's hard to get around him. You don't have to be that athletic when you're that big, and he's athletic enough. He can move a little bit, and it's pretty interesting. So that's a fun little pick there. And yeah, round 4 with the dozen picks, you can tell they we had a little fun with it.
Oh yeah, and the obvious comp for him is Orlando Brown, who they got an awful lot out of and flipped into a first-round pick. I mean, that would be tremendous. I didn't love Falele no matter where he landed, but I think this is his best landing spot. And you got to remember, I mean, guys like Jones and Falele, they're on their best behavior in terms of eating and making their body look good. Now that they have a home, some guys will be like, I'm not doing that anymore, But I love them in the run game. I think he's going to have a tough time with TJ Watt and Myles Garrett 4 times a year, though.
We've got to move on to
Yeah,
the Cincinnati Bengals, the Cleveland Browns, and the Pittsburgh Steelers next. But how about Built Bars? If you don't want to balloon up to 384 pounds, grab yourself a box of Built Bars, the newest flavor birthday cake puffs. That doesn't sound like it's a food that's healthy for you, but amazing. It's only got 150 calories and 16 grams of protein. And most Built Bars have only 130 calories and 4 grams of sugar and 17 grams of protein. And I don't know how they do it, but they make it taste good first and make it good for you second. It is high protein, low calorie. Compare it to other highly caloric protein bars. Compare it to candy bars, and it's the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. So really, it's the best of both worlds, and it's what it's like to eat a birthday cake puff from Built is pretty unbelievable to find something that's only 150 calories and has all that protein for you. And if you're going on summer vacations, make sure you're throwing Built Bars in your bag instead of some other really terrible for you snacks, and really just replace all the snacks in your pantry with Built Bars. That way you can feel good about it when you do go reach for that midday snack. And you can get 15% off at built.com with our promo code LOCKED15. You can get a mixed box, whatever flavors you are feeling. Some of the part-time flavors and new flavors that are happening all the time at built.com. Just go to the website built.com, use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. That is promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. Thanks again, everybody, for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We are on YouTube on the Locked On NFL channel. Make sure you go subscribe there. And hello to anybody who's already watching us. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, the bell, so you're notified when a new episode shows up. And you can also find tons of other content on the Locked On NFL channel, like the Locked On NFL podcast, which Matt and I used to host. And now there's just a number of hosts like Ross Jackson, Chris Carter, Tony Wiggins, and the whole gang talking about all 32 squads in the NFL. There is no off season for real fans in the NFL. It's why we do what we do. So make sure you subscribe to the Locked On NFL YouTube channel to find Peacock and Williamson daily. Who's up? The Cincinnati Bengals. What do you buy for a team that's got a franchise quarterback and was in the Super Bowl and fell a little bit short? Are you chasing what you missed in the Super Bowl, or are you just still trying to build around your young superstar quarterback? Because the Cincinnati Bengals were kind of lovable losers for a long time in the NFL, and now it's like, this team could turn into a juggernaut. And I really like how they let the draft fall to them, and they ended up with, again, not huge positional value, but one of the more dynamic defenders in this draft was Daxton Hill, the safety out of Michigan, at pick 31.
Yeah. Big picture, the Ravens deserve all the benefits of the doubt. They're a very successful organization. They're a great drafting team of this generation, the last 5 to 10 years. The Bengals are the opposite to me. And where I'm going with this is, frankly, it's not that hard to take Jamar Chase at 5 or Joe Burrow at 1 or even T. Higgins at 33. And there's some Billy Price, John Ross, Cedric Abuye, DeQuars Denard, his first-round picks lately. That being said, where I'm going with this is I'm buying this organization for the first time in a long time. That I think they have a plan, and it sure helps to have Burrow and Chase, of course. But their offseason to me has been very impressive because they had 2 goals. Let's rebuild this offensive line and let's rebuild this secondary. And they used free agency for one and the draft for the other. And they drafted 3 defensive backs that I like, including their first 2 picks. And I don't know how their defensive backfield overall is going to shape up. Are one of these guys going to be a Bates replacement because they can't, sign him long term? They like big corners. Taylor Britt and Hill, I both think, could play outside corner exclusively if they want. Hill was a slot more than anything with Michigan, but they have Hilton, who's much different than Hill. I mean, Hilton's 5 inches shorter and much smaller and much slower, but he's a really good slot. Will Hill be the Lamar Jackson spy? I mean, will he guard Mark Andrews that week? And there's just so much you can do with them. And Hill's absolutely one of my favorite players in this draft. I, many times on my Steelers show, said, It's 20 for the Steelers. Daxton Hill, sign me up. I love it. I think he's going to be a great player. Getting him at 31 is a steal.
More and more in college, you're just seeing them put their best player at that sort of star, that nickel.
Yeah.
Getting close to the line of scrimmage, so you can't avoid him like you could if there was a stud corner on the outside or a safety in deep coverage, especially with how many screens and RPOs and short, quick stuff that spread offenses in college are throwing these days. So I love Daxton Hill for that reason, and I think in the pros, when you're in those sub packages, which aren't sub packages anymore, that's base nickel, right? You play him at nickel, you play him close to the line of scrimmage because you can, but you could play him outside corner, you could play him at free safety, you could play him at strong safety, but I just like him at one of those safety spots, and you've already got Jesse Bates there in center field. So to me, you just play Hill next to Bates, and then when you're in those nickel packages, you have Daxton Hill close to the line of scrimmage in that nickel role. Let him do that, and let Jesse.
I think it depends who comes to town that week. If you're playing the Panthers, you might play man coverage against McCaffrey.
Yeah,
okay,
right.
He gets to do whatever you want. Right.
I love it. So he fits in, and they did a ton of work in free agency. And you look at that offensive line now, and you've got Jonah Williams, Jackson Carman, who is the second rounder at left guard, and he was a top 50 pick, and still is maybe the worst of their 5 starters now. So they're in a pretty good spot. And they brought in Karras. They have Alex Kappa that they signed in free agency. They brought in La'el Collins as well. So they did a really good job of addressing that need in free agency, which is what you want to do. And that's why you got to commend the Bengals for what they've done the last few years. They made the right call. You said it was easy. It was kind of easy, but there was a lot of push for them to help out their young quarterback who just tore an ACL to go Penei Sewell in the draft. And they made the right choice. And they went with the wide receiver in Jamar Chase. And they attacked that need in free agency to protect their quarterback and drafted best player available in the draft. And they did it again this year. So I love that for the Bengals, and I love the direction they're going there. They came back with the rest of their draft and added to the secondary with another versatile player who could be a corner or safety in Cam Taylor-Britt out of Nebraska. Zachary Carter, Florida defensive tackle in round 3. Late round 4, Cordell Volson from small school North Dakota State, offensive tackle. Might kick into guard, but has a chance to maybe play some tackle as well. Tyson Anderson, Toledo safety, the third safety, and another really athletic player that is a little bit bigger than the other two defensive backs that they drafted. And then Jeffrey Gunter, who was a high upside, boomer bust 7th round pass rusher out of Coastal Carolina, 6'4", 260, and could give you some value as a third down pass rusher. So I like what they did there. They really attacked the secondary, especially the safety position, and which is interesting because they've got one of the better safeties in the league already. I'm wondering if they're looking beyond Jesse Bates in some ways.
I just think it gives them options. Like I think Hill or Taylor-Britt could be outside corners. I think Anderson's a true safety, and he was my favorite sleeper safety, mid-round safety in this draft. Big, fast, developmental guy, but there's a lot of tools there. If you remember a month or so ago, my Bengals draft ditty little nugget was over X amount of years, 10, 12, whatever. All their first-round picks have either been offensive players or defensive backs. And they kept true with that. And all the corners they've taken in the first round, there's only 3 or 4 of them during that stretch, have been mostly offensive picks, are long, big-bodied guys. Going back to the Zimmer days, they want big corners. So if Hill, Taylor-Britt are safety corner tweeners, maybe they just look at them like big physical outside corners. Whatever. It just gives them a lot of options, to be very honest with you. And I just like that approach. And I want to mention Cordell Volson, the North Dakota State kid. He's another one of these over-aged, guys out of this draft because of COVID, stayed an extra year. But he may end up being a starting guard for them or their third tackle or their short yardage 6th offensive lineman. I mean, I think there's something there in the 4th round.
Yeah, not bad for a late 4th round pick at that.
Yeah.
First pick in round 4. So that is the draft class for the Cincinnati Bengals. I like it. I would give it a B+. There's only 6 picks in total, and they didn't pick until pick 31. And, half of their picks were the same position potentially if they all end up playing safety, which I don't think is going to happen. No. I think Cam Taylor-Britt's going to come as the corner. But, it's an interesting draft class there for them. But I like what they did. I like the direction they're going. When you look at their plan with the rest of their offseason too, with what they did in draft versus what they did in free agency. I like it. I'm giving them a solid B, even to the B+ range for the Cincinnati Bengals. Next, let's talk Cleveland Browns.
Super quick Bengals note. And I agree with you that they did well. I'm very impressed with their offseason, and I give them credit because usually their second pick in the draft is about where their first pick in the draft was this year. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true.
You know what I mean?
That's very true. And they got some upside with all of their picks. Any of those guys they picked could hit all the way down to the 7th round, at least give them value as a rotational player. So I do like that aspect of their draft as well. Solid B there for the Cincinnati Bengals. Next, we've got the Cleveland Browns and the Pittsburgh Steelers. How about those Cleveland Browns? This is, I feel like it's the worst draft of the division.
Matt. I do too. But Watson obviously has some weight here, and right.
They had to trade away their early pick, so they didn't pick until round 3. But they had 3/3, 2 4ths.
They did trade down again to get more picks. They realized they need to throw a lot at the wall here and see what sticks.
And that's exactly what this draft is. There's a lot of stuff on the wall right now, and I don't know which one of these are going to stick, but Martin Emerson, Mississippi State, was their first selection, the 4th pick in round 3, 6'2", 200-pound, big-body cornerback out of Mississippi State. Then Alex Wright. And look, Alex Wright was one of my guys I was looking at. Was very sleepery, but I thought he was a day 3 guy more than a day 2 guy. They got him in the middle of the 3rd round out of UAB, big-bodied, 6'5", 270 pass rusher that is really raw. David Bell did not work out well, but people really liked him pre-draft, and he had some production at Purdue, 6'1", 212-pound wide receiver, but not dynamic. Their best pick, in my opinion, value-wise, is Perrion Winfrey at the top of round 4 at defensive tackle, because it wasn't a deep defensive tackle class, and there's some boomer bust with Perrion Winfrey, but loved seeing him just dominating one-on-ones at times at the Senior Bowl, even though his tape is kind of up and down. Then they went kicker in round 4 with Cade York out of LSU. And anytime you start going kicker early, you kind of start to lose me. Jerome Ford, Cincinnati running back in round 5. Michael Woods, the 2nd.
Kicking in Louisiana is a lot different than kicking next to the lake in December, by the way. And I know nothing about Mr. York, and I wish him the best. But trust me, I was a part of that organization. And when we were in the draft room, we had Phil Dawson, who lasted forever. But when we looked at kickers, we're like, I don't want anyone from the South or West.
Just because they're not even ready for it.
No clue. Right.
You mean you didn't crush that punter and kicker tape, Matt?
Crushed it
before the draft?
It wasn't my department.
Okay. Let's see. Michael Woods, Oklahoma wide receiver. They went back to Oklahoma in round 7 with Isaiah Thomas, the defensive end, and one of the NBA All-Stars, one of the many NBA All-Stars in this draft.
I wanted him to land with Kobe Bryant, but
yeah, exactly. That would be nice, and maybe Chris Paul too.
There you go.
And Dawson Deaton was actually maybe my second favorite pick value-wise in the class for them. Center out of Texas Tech that I think has a chance to stick late 7th round.
Yep, and they got rid of Treader. So, I mean, that was my favorite pick, actually, considering what they paid for him. Might work out real well for him.
Right, exactly. But I think you nailed it. Like, they threw a bunch against the wall, see what sticks. Maybe they get a couple of players here. Maybe there's some dirty starters in there, but I see mostly depth.
Yeah, and the other thing that happened is they traded Troy Hill back to the Rams, which I think made the Emerson pick a little bit more logical. I don't know if Emerson's an outside or a slot. He's got good length, but I think most project him to a slot. That's where Troy Hill was. They have Newsome and Ward as the outside guys, so I assume the Emerson pick is, pigeonholing him into Troy Hill. And I can't mention Troy Hill without one of my favorite things that I go to. It's kind of like the Taylor Swift, Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift thing. My grandparents grew up on Troy Hill here in Pittsburgh. So I always have to mention that when I throw Troy Hill out there. That's just my own little side note. Alex Wright and Winfrey, there's potential there. They will look a lot better if they bring back Clowney or Namakong Suh, who they've been rumored to be talking to lately, or both, but if they're counting on these two rookies to do a lot in year 1, I'd be a little concerned. I'm with you on Winfrey. Like, if you watch him at the Senior Bowl in one-on-ones or his highlights, he's phenomenal. Why is he last to the 108th pick? Well, I'm not sure how to best say this, but I guess he's very high energy. He's definitely high energy, high maintenance, that he's a handful to be around every day. He's not for everyone. We'll put it that way.
Yeah.
You got to manage him.
Yeah, the Oklahoma. You talk to the Oklahoma staff. You're like, hey, talk to me about Perry and Winfrey. He's like, well, he's high energy. You're like, okay, tell me the truth. Okay, he's high maintenance too. Yeah.
Right. Like we love the player, but we won't miss him around here every day. He makes us a little bonkers, you know?
That happens a lot. There's so many
Right.
personalities and character reports and medical that we don't get a chance to see. We just look at the tape and you never know what else is being talked about with some of these prospects, and it might lead to some falls. But it seemed like he was higher than a round 4 prospect for that reason. But yeah, overall, whatever. As a C- draft, I guess, for me. I can't totally crush it. We'll see if Emerson plays. I wonder if they're thinking, we just talked about how you put your best player in the slot. What if they're thinking about putting, when you go nickel, you put Denzel Ward in the slot and you have Emerson come in and play outside as the third corner or something like that.
That's a possibility as well. And speaking of slot, I think Bell just immediately fills the Landry, boring, move the chains, quality player, little upside type, but that's good for them. He'll block for the run game, which is important to them too. And then my last little nugget is I thought the Jerome Ford pick was very curious, with not only giving Chubb money, giving Hunt money, but who's the other one that played some last year? Williams, I think his name is. I mean, they gave him like $3 million in restricted money. So a little alarm bell went off the back of my head. And I really like Ford, by the way. I wonder if they're fielding offers for Kareem Hunt, because he's the only one that could move, I
was about to say the same thing. And for a team that might think they could need a starting caliber running back, that would be smart. And, some tread on the tires and keep filtering in those
off the field. Right. Yeah. No, you're right.
How about those Pittsburgh Steelers starting things off with a quarterback, the local kid, Kenny Pickett, out of the University of Pittsburgh? He gets to stay. I mean, he doesn't even have to move if he doesn't want to, although he can afford much better digs, I'm sure, than he did in college. I don't know if he had any of that, the NIL money there that was coming in from Pitt or anything like that. So I don't know where he was living, but
we've actually asked about him, and he said, I love my roommates, but I will not be having any. He lives with like 4 dudes from the team or whatever.
No. Your first round pick, you should not have roommates unless they're paying you rent and they're living out in the boathouse or something.
Or you're engaged to her, right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Right. But he is anxious to move. But for people who don't know, I should just tell you this right off the bat. I mean, the facility where Pitt and the Steelers are, there's a wall that goes right down the middle, and on the right side is Pitt, and on the left side is the Steelers, and then there's a cafeteria to the side. There's 4 football fields behind there. First 2 are the Steelers, second 2 are Pitt's. There's an indoor facility on the other side of the parking lot, so you see each other all the time. They're going to know Pickett, to say the least, maybe more than any team knows about any player in the entire draft.
And look, we know the strengths and weaknesses. To be honest with you, sometimes the scouting part is pretty easy. Like, how does the rest go? And nobody knew more about a prospect, I think is the way you put it, in the draft than the Steelers knew about Kenny Pickett. And so they believe in the young man. And I think that was the key there with this pick, right?
That's why I can put my stamp of approval on it. Like, we did, who are your top 20 if you were the Steelers GM? And I had Pickett right outside that. He was like 21 or 22 for me. I would have taken Dax Hill or McDuffie in real time when the 20th pick popped up. But I've never met Kenny Pickett. I haven't sat down with him. I don't know all those other things. And I still know people in the Pitt building that I would trust to the ends of the earth. And I'm sure they told Tomlin and Colbert everything about Pickett, which means I'd be really shocked if he's a bust. You know what I mean? Like, just knowing what they know about him.
By the way, who's going to be the next GM of the Pittsburgh Steelers? And doesn't that seem odd and this happened with Ozzie Newsome, right? Where you pick the next quarterback on your way out. You would think that the new guy would get a chance to pick their own quarterback.
This is a bigger conversation we can have, but Tomlin and Colbert basically have equal power, but it's the Rooney's organization. Every pick they ever make this is our pick. Kevin is still going to be involved. So the new guy is going to learn slowly, and nothing happens real fast or abruptly with this organization. Let's just say that.
I gotcha. Okay. No, that makes sense. And that's why there's stability.
Right. I mean, it's the tortoise winning the race,
Mm-hmm. Moving on past round 1, the Pittsburgh Steelers drafted wide receiver George Pickens out of Georgia in round 2. Round 3, DeMarvin Leal, Texas A&M defensive end, that sort of 3-4-5 technique defensive end there out of Texas A&M. Then went with dynamic speed, but not size, in Calvin Austin, the third out of Memphis at wide receiver. Connor Hayward, 6th round, sort of H-back, fullback, tight end. It's a family business over there in Pittsburgh well. Another Hayward in the building now from Michigan State. Mark Robinson, Ole Miss outside linebacker in round 7. And to finish it up, their second 7th rounder was another quarterback. They started and ended with quarterbacks. In this one, it was South Dakota State passer Chris Oladokun.
You did a better job than I have yet with that name. I've avoided it like the plague.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's sort of every other pick I liked. I still don't know about Kenny Pickett at 20. I just didn't love the process.
Yeah.
Maybe he turns out to be the guy there. I want to see what his hand size with the NFL ball and playing a little bit later in the season in Pittsburgh, because those college seasons end pretty early. So we'll see what that ends up looking like for Kenny Pickett. But it seems like a pretty stable human being there, at least, to try to compete with Teddy or with Mitch Trubisky at quarterback. I love the George Pickens pick. We've talked about this multiple times, and my take was, we're going to look back, and especially we talked about giving the Ravens credit. I give the Steelers maybe too much credit. Oh, they picked a wide receiver. It's going to be a hit.
Yeah, sure.
So when you see Pickens fall, the Steelers like, of course they nailed this one. It's going to be a hit. They're so good at picking wide receivers, and we're going to look at Wan'Dale Robinson and Tyquan Thornton and be like, what the hell are these teams thinking passing on George Pickens? So he goes to the Steelers, and I really like the fit for Pickens too, to be able to go there. Not the pressure of a first-round player, but he has all the talent in the world with Mike Tomlin to be, sort of a mentor there for him as well.
They've handled some big personalities in that wide receiver room.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. To say that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So well versed in that. So they draft the talent. The third rounder, I liked it. Okay. You get yourself a defensive lineman there, sort of a boomer busty type of player, which is really what all of this has been so far of the Steelers. You could talk me into any of these guys being booms or busts so far in the first 3 rounds. Calvin Austin, though, feels pretty safe for a 4th round pick. I thought he was going to go on day 2 just because how dynamically athletic he is, not just 4.3 deep speed, but he's got amazing quicks. He's fearless with the ball in his hands. He plays bigger than his 5'7" size, and he's got return value. So if all he ever becomes for you is a dynamic returner late round 4, that's still a really good pick. So it might even be my favorite pick of the draft for them. And by the way,
it's my favorite pick of the draft too.
Is it? Yeah. And according to Peter King, because he was in the Baltimore Ravens draft room, they were going to take him with the very next pick.
Yep. So I did kind of criticize the Ravens for not taking a receiver. They were trying, I mean, it just didn't work out, and it doesn't always work out that way. Let's start with Austin real quick, because he's little, but boy, is he fast, and he's going to get a lot of jet sweeps in this Matt Canada, type of offense that we really haven't seen yet because the quarterback hindered it. But here's my favorite Austin stat is over 90% of his receptions came as an outside receiver and often against man coverage. And I'm going to quote Greg Cosell on him saying he might be the outlier of, these little guys that can actually play on the outside and defeat man coverage with regularity, because he did all the time in college for 2 straight years. And he has track speed. I mean, so I think that's a great risk to take. I think Pickens is a great pick as well. There's some immaturity stuff with him. There's nothing criminal. It's just he was a 5-star recruit that everything came kind of easy to him, a little bit entitled. He's also highly, highly competitive and emotional as a regard, but he needs reeled in a little bit, but that's a perfect situation for that to happen. Leal's the one I didn't quite understand, because he's going to be an end in the 3-4, but really he's going to be an interior pass rusher, but he doesn't really look like Hayward or Tuitt or Kiesel or Aaron Smith. He's not as long as them. He's not as tall as them. I looked at Leal kind of as a Michael Bennett, Solomon Thomas, base 4-3 end, bump inside type. But he's a very high talent. Him and Pickens a year ago were on the McShay way too early mock drafts as like top 10 picks. You know what I mean? So their final year didn't go exactly to plan.
So overall, I like some things. I didn't think they got great value. Sort of a C+, B- sort of a draft for me. And it's a boomer bust class, especially on day 1 and 2. And this could look like an A in a few years, and it could look like an F in a few years. And so this is going to be a very interesting class to follow. The
Pickett to Pickens conversation is obviously going to tell the story. 2 little nuggets on the late guys. Connor Hayward, I'm sure, factors in as Cam Hayward's brother, of course. The Steelers now have 4 set of brothers, by the way, on the roster, which is bonkers. But he's kind of
real quick on Hayward. If
Yeah.
he wasn't a Hayward, he wouldn't have got drafted by anybody.
Probably not. I mean, they look at him as a use check. I don't know if he's a tight end or a fullback. He's a special teamer. He's a blocker. He's Cam's little brother. So
I mean, he's not body beautiful at all, but he plays his butt off. So I'm not going to put it past him that he can stick either.
Right. I mean, kind of like Derek Watt. Like Derek Watt's the Steelers' best special teams player. He plays 2 snaps a game on offense. If Cam's little brother can do that, great. You make one of the stars happy, and he will have a role. Yeah.
But does little Hayward knock little Watt off the roster?
I don't know. That's gonna be a nice little battle there. Or the fuck is that? 4 sets of brothers. And then I just want to address this real quick too. The 7th round quarterback. When that happened, I'm like, what the heck? And why are they drafting a second one? And then we thought it through and realized, unfortunately, Dwayne Haskins passed away, and they need a camp arm now. You got to bring 4 guys to camp, and they only have 3 with Pickett, Rudolph, and Trubisky. So if I'm an undrafted free agent, the last team in the league I want to go to is the only team that used a 1st-round pick on a quarterback. Like, I'd rather go to Kansas City. I'd rather go to Jacksonville. Like, you're not going to get any reps as an undrafted free agent with Pickett, Trubisky, and Rudolph getting every snap. So instead of trying to recruit one, just draft them and don't give the young man the option. And I guess this Oluwatakon transferred 3 times. So he's a really quick learner of the system, and he's not going to get any reps, and he's a really good athlete, and they think he can be the Lamar practice squad guy, Okay.
Yeah, so get him on the practice squad.
Right.
He can play Lamar and let some folks chase him around in practice. I like that.
Right. And you wouldn't have signed with us in free agency, so we drafted you.
Because otherwise you would have had Calvin Austin probably playing Lamar in practice.
Right. That's what they have been doing, that type of thing. Right. It wasn't Ben or Rudolph.
A lot of teams do that. They just throw a wide receiver, especially a practice squad wide receiver back there to run around and act like he's on a punt return and let guys chase him around. But then you can't.
That's not what Lamar does.
Yeah, the threat of the pass goes away, so it doesn't really do any good for you, probably.
Yeah, Lamar can complete an out route.
All right, we got to get out of here. Thanks everybody for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen. We will continue our draft grades to only 2 divisions to go, the AFC South and the AFC West. That will be Monday and Tuesday, or actually that'll be Monday and Wednesday, because we've got schedule release to talk about on Friday's program. And then we'll have our live chat Twitter Tuesday episode next week there. So start getting those questions into us on Twitter at BD Peacock, at Williamson NFL, or just join us live in the chat on Tuesday for that podcast. And we'll be back tomorrow right here, Peacock and Williamson.